you know that old Bryce quote that I always tell my students too, right? They come up with this.
Yeah, I loved it.
This
Yeah.
complex system, and who would have thought, this amongst men whose chief occupation is to kill one another, right? So, I mean, it begs, I always tell my students, it's like, I think that it's a lovely level of self-awareness that they knew that, like, all right, let's not descend into violence because that's what we're prone to. So let's like try to get a handle on this. And, at least that's what it feels like to me, figure out how to live according to the law. But it does beg the question about the violence. And CJ, what was in our last podcast with Leszek, what was he saying about archaeology and violence?
Oh, he insinuated that through his research, looking at thousands and thousands of graves, that the evidence for the Viking Age being an age of violence is not true. That in the archaeological record, the evidence for that violence is non-existent practically. To which I push back a little, thinking, well, I think a warrior culture implies some degree of violence, right? Because the elite in your society are killers, essentially. So, but he said, in the graves, there's just not that evidence for the trauma one might expect from this being an age of violence, which I found really interesting. It was good food for thought, but I'm not entirely convinced, but then again, I haven't seen thousands of graves.
So what do you think about that, Jesse?
I love it. First of all, Leszek's a wonderful archaeologist, and he was going to be working with us at one time. You held up a book, Viking Age Iceland. What I'm really interested in is how the society worked. And if you're that far in the north and you have to maintain a certain level of continuity and peace, because if you go around and burn down farmsteads all the time and kill everybody, you can't make it through the long, hard winter, where you store the food and whatnot. So there are all kinds of rules about how you deal with violence, and that's something that interests me. And I wrote a book on feud in the Icelandic saga, and I had this all worked out. However, the first two graves we uncovered at Mossfell, one guy has an axe chopped through his head and a sword slice on the back of his head and whatnot. And there's a saga that talks about an attack on Mossfell by a rival chieftain, who's the two sons of the chieftain at Mossfell and this other guy had killed each other in a feud, and they kill each other there. And I don't want to disagree with Leszek, but I must tell you, I do think it was a violent place. And the thing is, if you study feuding societies, and this definitely was a feuding society, and wealth and status was often regulated by feud. There are rules to keep it within bounds, but you'll find in these societies that an awful lot of young men don't make it past 30.